Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
We're going to have some interesting topics in some upcoming episodes. And we're going to get into some areas that I think some role players are just, they avoid it. They don't think about it. And that really is, diversity, inclusiveness and so on. And we're seeing that in worlds in Star Trek and so on. And I think it's worth having a good, as Jason and I both agree. We need to have that discussion. And I think we're working on getting some, at least one fantastic
Stay tuned. Stay tuned for episode 25, everybody.
Yeah.
This is the plan. Every 0 and 5 on the episode dial. We're working to bring you really interesting interviews, and we're just gonna leave it there. Stay tuned.
We're talking, so that's success. That's success for the podcast, and that's success for anyone who listens to have those discussions. Why don't we talk a little bit about things that are maybe perhaps have been less than successful in the RPG world?
In the RPG world. Yes, I agree.
So Jason and I were talking about what we were going to do for a discussion tonight. And I told him I'm looking at my shelf and I see all sorts of RPGs that may be good, may not have been good, or were just, well, I don't want to get worse than that.
Or maybe just had bad, maybe it was the wrong timing or the wrong idea, but for one reason or another, or many, they didn't take off. And even if they did gain some traction upon publication, perhaps they are not held in the highest esteem today.
And it could be, one of the things we've talked a lot about is the dice mechanic. A lot of times that can be the destructive component to an RPG.
That's right.
If the dice mechanic is poor. So the first one, it's funny because as Jason and I are prepping, it was almost like serendipity. The first one that comes to mind franchise wise is Star Trek. And prior to Modiphius taking over the Star Trek franchise, there was FASA, right?
Yep.
And
FASA,
Last Unicorn Games. And neither one of those got a lot of traction. And I know Jason is we're laughing because of some of the material we were showing before
that I'm holding in my hand right now.
Yes. Yeah. So what do you got there? Because you showed it to me, but we wouldn't talk about it.
Brad, yeah, right before we went live, Brad was actually speechless for a moment when I held up the cover to the camera, and he's like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "We'll talk."
Okay. Yep.
So, the year was 1989. Oh, and we should preface. We're just going to. You know what? If any of you out there listening were involved in the writing or design or conceptualization of any of these games, A, let us know because we'd love to talk to you. B, we're going to warn you. We're not going to be nice about this. We're going to be honest but tactful. And C, we're not going to be very complimentary about some of these games. We're gonna pick some fun for the sake of fun. And
it'll be a little tongue in cheek, but
these are our opinions, right? Yeah. I mean, obviously, all of these are there are opinions, there are perspectives. Okay, so the year, everybody, was 1989. It was 2 years after Star Trek TNG debuted. Brad, you and I were each depending on when this actually came out, approximately 15 at the time.
Yep.
Just put that in. I remember, I'll reveal in a sec to everybody. I remember sitting in the back seat. One of my parents with my family. One of my parents were up front. One of them was driving. I remember looking through this, being riveted. Wherever we got this, probably in my hometown. I don't know. I remember just being riveted. But I remember looking through this, thinking, "Wait a minute." Now I was 15, thinking, I know for a fact there are some significant inaccuracies and assumptions being made in this.
Boy.
And this will not surprise Brad nor my wife, nor my family, nor my maybe children. They're my children. I just made it, probably won't surprise them. That I struggled with that a bit. I thought, okay, this is like canon. This is official stuff. I mean, no one was really using the word canon back in the day, but this is official stuff. But how can it be wrong? And so I never really made peace with that, other than at some point it's like, okay, fine, whatever. So
and let me
Mhm.
before you go, we've never had this conversation
Not this
regarding
one.
this book.
No.
So this is the first time I'm hearing it.
So I am holding the Star Trek The Next Generation first year source book for the Star Trek the role-playing game, published by FASA. Remember FASA? Some of us, maybe not so fondly, as I'm flipping through here, doing what I tell Brad Alls not to do. So if I were to sum this up, this first year source book, it's very thin, by the way. The whole thing is 64 pages. To put that in perspective, this source book is not even the length of a typical adventure out of any of the major publishers today, any platform.
No.
It is dense with information, some of it, at least regarding the starships, just blatantly inaccurate. Don't even get me started on here. Let me hold this up for you, Brad. Where is it? The schematics of the ships are interesting, but was it this one that described Data's innards? This one I had like maybe I'm whooped. Oh, look, the middle just fell out. Well, in all fairness, it is decades old. Okay, maybe it's not in this one. I think it's in this one, and I can't find it. Like existentially, I struggled with this. Basically, it's terrible. It's terrible, but there was nothing out there. There was nothing out there to contend with it. So this goes all the way back to the 80s when you had FASA's Star Trek games, and I mean,
when they're saying year one, were they trying to, in effect, do you think, come out with a book per year per season? Is that what when they're saying year one? I'm wondering if that reflected season one.
I'm assuming so. First year source
Okay.
book, I have to assume, because TNG came out in September of 87.
Yep.
This had a publication date of 89, which means it probably came out late 88 or early 89.
Mhm.
Back then, probably early 89, which means that they would have produced this as season one of TNG was wrapping.
Yeah.
And it was clear no one had any indication where the show was going, or what data, like it's all the first year, all the first season species.
Did it look like they actually watched the show?
It looks like they at least got screenshots, because that's what's in the book. I mean,
Okay.
Wesley literally looks like he was 14 or 13, because Will Wheaton was 13, actually 14 or 15 at the time. It's
Okay.
pretty. Anyways, this is the height of what's on my RPG bookshelf of why. It was interesting when I was a kid. I mean, don't get me. You're going to talk about Last Unicorn stuff, which I think might even.
Well, no. But you bring
worse,
you bring up FASA because
Yeah.
our friend Scott,
Yeah,
he role played Star Trek, just as much as not just as much. He's obviously, Scott is a phenomenal game master for Star Wars, going back to D6 era. Yeah. He gave me a pile of FASA Star Trek stuff years ago.
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah, years ago. I was always wondering if he'd ever want it back. So I've kept it all together.
Yeah.
So Scott, if you do want it back, if you're ever listening, I have it here for you. But he definitely did not want it. Asked me if I did, because I'd never seen it. He goes, well, it might be decent for some reading material. But so I've never played it, but I did look through some of the material. And it really looked like they were trying to shoehorn Star Trek into some sort of space RPG that they already had in the back of their mind.
Yeah.
And they were, it it was a wooden wall and they were trying to put stucco on a wooden wall and it wasn't going to work, or a paneled wall. So,
if you enjoyed, listeners, if you enjoyed the FASA Star Trek, may the force be with you.
So after that,
yeah,
and I don't know, because we jumped in here without me doing a little bit of research on this. There was some time between FASA and then when a company called Last Unicorn Games came out with a Star Trek RPG.
Don't even get me started.
Yep. So you and I both have the 2 source books, the one for Next Generation
and then DS9.
Yep. And then I have the box set for Starfleet Academy.
Oh, interesting.
And there's one more sitting on there, and I don't want to stand up.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yep.
But I mean, let's be honest. If I tried to sell them at half price books, they'd probably make me pay to take them from them. So
okay, actually, not at ours. They have demonstrated, just as I peruse their shelves, they can sell almost anything RPG.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think so.
So Last Unicorn, we bought the book right around close to the same time.
Yep. The DS9.
The DS9.
Yep, I remember.
Because we were intent
late 90s
on trying to play this game.
Yep.
Then we opened the book.
And I want to just interject, to really I'm just going to say, I was in grad school at the time. Yeah. I was used to studying.
Yeah.
We opened the book and what happened, Brad?
Well, I can't really say I don't want to have to change our rating on Podbean, but we were less than enthused with the mechanic and the material itself.
It just didn't make sense. Yeah.
No, but it was the only thing we had.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's not like today when you have so many choices now that RPGs are having a renaissance.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest. We went out, we hoped, we have the TNG and the DS9 guides. Books.
And they were expensive books. And neither of us had anything at the time. I mean, we were in school or new to our jobs. We weren't floating in cash.
No. And we had really hoped that the second book would fix the issues of the first book. And it didn't.
It didn't. Yeah.
And we never got to a point where we could play it. I remember there was a bookstore and coffee shop that Jason and I would frequent.
Audubon Court Books.
Yep. And we would frequent it weekly, once a week, if not twice.
Will always be our bookstore. My book, like that is the bookstore.
Yep.
Yep.
And I remember we brought the book in. I remember this.
Do you really?
I do. I remember we had the TNG book in. Mm-hmm. And there was always this, and this is extra alliteration that we don't need, but there was always this creepy older guy that was hanging out with the young folk. I don't know if you remember
that. Yeah, that was a little weird.
Yeah. And I remember sitting down and you and I started going through the book. We didn't have any dice or anything like that. We were just trying to figure out how to play it. You were in grad school at the time.
Yeah.
And you have a PhD now. So if someone's I'm serious. If someone's going to try to write something to make it difficult for you to comprehend, or
it shouldn't be this bad.
No. I mean, I looked at this and I'm like, I these are more like source books, and you and I picked up.
Yeah.
Source books.
Yeah.
So,
and core rule books are never easy to navigate.
No,
but these were just opaque.
I couldn't. I was just gonna. There was a word that I wanted to use when it came down to it.
No swearing, Brad. No, sorry.
Yeah, no. I know that. That's why I'm looking for because they came out with. I turned my phone off. Sorry, listeners. They came out with all this material, and then when Last Unicorn ceased to exist, they closed down. So they ended up releasing all the material out into the public domain. If you feel so inclined to take a shot at looking for it, just make sure that let's be respectful of copyright law and all that. I think it is in effect abandoned publications. I don't think
Interesting.
anyone, unless Modifius bought the license to it, just double check and make sure.
That's a good question.
You know, I don't want to advocate anyone grabbing and pirating material.
No.
But what's funny is the system, if I remember correctly, was called the Icon system.
I don't even know.
And excuse me. And I'm a gentleman named Jeffrey Harlan wrote a blog article about Trek Interrupted, the Last Unicorn.
Oh, interesting.
And you can go into this, like difficulty numbers, you know, and the icon rules. If a drama die rolls a 6, the character has achieved spectacular success. So they in effect, instead of using like percentage dice, they used a mix of 6-sided dice to try to generate, you know.
But it makes sense given the time period, because the D6 system, right, by Steve Jackson and with Star Wars and Ghostbusters and the other things, it was so popular and it was so successful.
Yeah, and it was not hyper difficult. I think they convoluted the system to try to differentiate themselves from the standard D6 system, which was so popular.
Right. Okay, so what do you have that's not Star Trek? Because you mentioned a few others. I know you've been talking about them for a year or two, but they're a little more niche.
Okay, so the one that I have found the most interesting, and I can't find it, and I believe that Margaret Weiss, well-known sci-fi writer, had a part in it, was the Firefly Rpg. Okay. Now, Firefly was obviously, it was 13 episodes. All 13 weren't released they weren't broadcast. They ended up releasing, or is it 14? I can't remember. I think it's 14. Wonderful show. You know, I would assume most people know what Firefly is. If it isn't, it's space meets Wild West. And it had a great cast. Nathan Fillion, who is out. Marina Baccarin, who is Deadpool's wife. They had Adam Baldwin.
I mean, they all actually went on to be successful in their own ways. Some of them quite successful.
Yeah. And so they came out with a Firefly RPG. I think the problem is, and not even getting into the mechanic, because I didn't get far enough into it. You're the one that turned me on to Firefly. And I had never heard of it before you told me that it was out on Apple TV and you could get all 14 and watch all the episodes. I think it was 13 or 14.
Yeah.
I watched them and I was hooked. I bought the 2 books that were the scripts for the episodes.
Interesting.
I found, ironically, you just talked about this, at one of the used bookstores, I found some of the Firefly material. I would think, and I've showed you this before. I have the Firefly board game, which is kind of a cross between an RPG and a board game. And you can play it as a solo player, which I have done, and it's actually fun. Firefly, I think this idea of, it's almost a little Star Wars-ish, based off of the story you're telling that we're playing. You're a rogue. You're trying to just survive out in the vast. You have to avoid the evil characters, the Reavers, or the government, if you're what they call the brown coat or a rebel.
I just have to interject. If you you and our listeners, if you haven't seen the outtakes for Firefly, after you gotta watch the outtakes, especially the comments about the Reavers. So we're just gonna leave it at that.
yeah. I don't think that's material we would allow on here, but
not for everyone.
I think Firefly was it didn't garner enough attention. So when they released a role-playing game for it, a lot of people didn't know what it was.
It's a cult classic as a series, and then the film did well, but it stayed niche, and presumably there wasn't a market for it.
Yeah, and if you go watch Serenity, which is the name of the film,
which is well worth watching.
It's well worth watching. But if you watch it without having watched the series, I don't think you're going to get a lot out of it. I think there's a lot of, without going into it,
Interesting.
there's a lot of background starting
Mhm.
from the first moments, because remember the
Of the
first
movie.
moments of the
Yeah.
movie were a recording of a breakout, without getting into
Yeah.
a lot of
No.
detail.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Good luggage is important.
yeah,
Yeah. No. It's odd because that's one of those things. So my wife Amy, one of her good friends from childhood, Allie, she tipped me off to Firefly, loaned me her DVDs, and I binged them. I binged them over like 3 days, and like binged them up until like an hour. Sorry, up until the minutes before Amy and I had to leave the townhouse at the time to get on a plane for a trip. I'm like, I gotta finish this. I gotta finish this. The film, then you can watch the film without seeing the series, though I agree it makes a lot less sense. And you can watch the series and not lose any context by not seeing the film, because Joss Whedon knew it was obvious this was dead, right? The series wasn't going to continue. The movie was a one-off. It was, how do you do something new for the fans and interesting for those who weren't? I mean, it's don't watch it with children. It's
No.
not terrible, but it's violent. It's a really fun movie, though. I gotta say, now I want to watch it again.
Yeah, and if you even go out on like IMDb or whatever, if you look at the cast of the movie, if you look at the cast of the TV series, I know that cast doesn't equate success,
It's a good cast.
but it was such a good cast.
It was all around, every role.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this idea, I was like you, once I started watching it, this idea of expanding off of the earth that was,
Yeah.
and expanding out into the galaxy, or where, whatever you want to call it. And the fringes were not as well taken care of as the center planets. And point being, though, I didn't dig too deeply into the RPG because, one, I figured no one would play it with me.
Right. So far, you've been right.
Yeah, it was fun material to read.
Yep.
The whole Firefly, I think I'm not the type of person to go to a Comic-Con or a Trek Con or anything like that. But if they had a Firefly thing, I would probably considering going without dressing up in Firefly garb.
You would not dress up, but in all fairness, what you just said was a little bit of a lie, because it wasn't that many years ago, like 2, that you asked me, would you ever be interested in going to a con?
Yeah, well, not a Comic-Con, because we aren't gonna, because neither one of us would dress up. I think at the time we were looking.
Is that required?
No, but it's almost like you stand out more, at least from what I've seen. You stand out more if you're dressed normally versus if you're dressed in character. So, and again, those of you who have been to all of those,
more power to you.
You're talking to 2 people who have never been to one. So I'm making some broad swath assumptions.
And we're hypocrites, because anytime Star Wars or Star Trek or D&D shares something at any of the cons, we stream it.
Oh yeah.
Right. Like the day after New York Comic-Con, I was surfing the web looking for the videos and updates on Star Trek Prodigy.
Let's be honest. You and I will stream or go back and watch the stream of when Apple launches stuff.
I was just going to say, we also watch Apple streams. So, right. I mean, let he who is without nerdiness cast the first aspersion.
Yeah. I'll give one more. One more that's sitting on my shelf. And again, I didn't dive into it, but I can see it here, and it is okay. You're going to hear me get up because I need to get the book now. I know we're going way off. It's called A Song of Fire and Ice.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned this.
A role-playing game for the Game of Thrones, written, and it's in the what's called the Chronicle system, which,
oh boy,
again,
read a bit, brother.
Let's see. Most people in Westeros believe in the gods in some form. They give you the father, the mother, the warrior, the smith. here's the anointed knight. They in effect were trying to shoehorn characters and shoehorn kind of a D&D-esque type of thing. There's a whole page on here where it's talking about the different crests and how to build, I'll point this out, how to build the crest for your family.
I mean, I can see either of us geeking out over that, but what's your take on this, Brad? Is this game modeled after the original story or modeled after the series?
I think if I'm looking at this, it was written obviously before the end of the series.
Oh, sure.
So is it written relatively early on? They have all the crests of the houses. So ultimately, I think they were trying to do, and again, I don't know the dice mechanic here, so I sound quite ignorant, but when I look at destiny points, and you have abilities and specialties like warfare, command, strategy, courage, coordinate. It looks very, very on a top level D&D-esque.
Right.
The challenge I have is that I have not watched Game of Thrones.
I've seen a few clips online. That's it. Just didn't interest me.
Let me rephrase that. I watched the first episode of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And I don't consider myself a prude in any way.
Yeah.
But I watched it and I felt like a little kid putting his hands over his face and opening up his fingers just long enough to kind of see what's outside when he's watching It or Nightmare on Elm Street. There was stuff that I saw on screen that I would dare not repeat here.
So what you're saying is eventually there's going to be a Squid Game RPG.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Actually, that's kind of funny you mentioned that. I think there probably could be. But
I have not seen a single episode, but I hear lots of people talking about it.
My wife and my daughter have watched it.
So good, because I hear it's remarkably violent.
Yeah, I watched the 4th episode of it because that's what they were in.
Okay.
But I'm not the type of person that likes to watch horror or a ton of gore or anything like that. I don't find that compelling.
Yeah.
That's what Game of Thrones was. And don't get me wrong, I'm fascinated by George R.R. Martin. I mean, he wrote the Game of Thrones. He wrote them.
The world is compelling.
Yeah, and he wrote these all on a unconnected, lack of internet PC using WordStar. And if you're old enough to remember WordStar, that was Word before Word, much like WordPerfect was Word before. Word.
That brings back
WordStar was actually written in CPM. You could run it in Unix, you could run it in CPM. God. And the reason he writes that way is because he said because of all the names and such within first of all, the names and all
there was no spell checker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly why he got sick and tired of it trying to autocorrect and spell and the whole paragraph being read because it's incorrect pronunciation. I think they shoehorned an RPG into a very compelling universe that was garnering a lot of attention. And it looks, and I don't necessarily know the dice mechanic, but there is even parlay in terms, there's even like a battle, a whole step related to battle, battlefield, unit and leader placement. So they tried to, maybe they did a good job. If you're out there listening, again, I'm coming from a perception of, or a perspective of ignorance on this. It just didn't feel like that show warranted necessarily a role-playing game.
So let's talk about this as we kind of slowly approach the end of this discussion. Let's just get analytical for a moment, maybe a little more higher level conceptual. So I mean, there are kind of two opposing elements here that we could discuss. On the one hand, I think any game world topic mechanic where people are having fun playing it or within it, to me, that's a good game. That's successful. That said, the reality is that not every story necessarily automatically makes for a good RPG. Sometimes it's context, sometimes it's timing and history, sometimes it's mechanic. And here's how I think of it. And then you can push back. Obviously I love Star Trek as much as any of these. Just in terms of stories. And I've enjoyed every single Star Trek movie. That said, Star Trek has never shown through its movies. There are a few legitimately great ones. I think motion picture is phenomenal. Still love it. Wrath of Khan is indisputably the best, the strongest. I think First Contact, I think you'd agree, is a close one right behind there.
Oh yeah.
Right. But Star Trek, for whatever reasons, that type of story, the way the topics, the way the problems are proposed, are solved, the dynamics, whatever, that makes for very good episodic. I shouldn't even say episodic. Makes for very good television. Okay, whereas Star Wars has lent itself beautifully to theater, to movies. Now, The Mandalorian is breaking that mold, but we're also at this point seeing a hybridization in terms of what's a movie, what's a show. But my point is simply different stories sometimes work better in different formats, and not all of them can be winners.
I think Star Wars stayed away from TV after the Christmas special.
I don't know if you could ever do better storytelling than lumpy.
Well, sorry, I sidetracked, but getting back to it, what can kill it? One, the dice mechanic.
Yep.
We've talked about systems, and even a system as simple as Fate. Fate's open-ended.
Yeah.
It's not complex.
Nope.
And you can develop very compelling stories within it. Same thing with another one I have on my bookshelf that garnered some attention, is Savage Worlds.
Still very popular.
Yep. Another open-ended system. To your point, there are franchises, movie, television, or whatnot, that I think would, in my opinion, cause some issues in terms of being able to build a good role-playing. Firefly, the dice mechanic was a little suspect, and there just isn't enough content. There is 13 episodes of TV and a movie. You're going to have to make up a lot of content.
That's right.
And create canon. Game of Thrones, very deep, a lot to view. You have to take in effect what can be a very violent and gory and
hypersexualized,
and morally suspect world. And how do you make that a viable RPG?
Right.
That nobody over the age or nobody under the age of 25 could play. So, and then you have others. I haven't heard as much about Starfinder as I've heard Pathfinder.
My impression is that it's catching on. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's ever going to get the traction of Pathfinder, but Starfinder certainly seems to have a following. I think the economics will tell us, Brad, right? If there's going to be a Starfinder 2E in a few years, although Starfinder, I think, paved the way for some of the revisions that became Pathfinder 2E.
Oh, they did. Absolutely. Yeah. They came out and said that. But I think when it comes right down to it, you either have to have a compelling franchise or story, and you have to have a compelling or a attractive mechanic.
And a third point I would add, you have to have an audience that's available for it, that would find it interesting. And that's probably the hardest one to predict.
Yeah, when I picked up the Game of Thrones stuff, the books were selling for $2 a piece.
Wow.
It's why I picked it up. The Firefly things I got cheap, just because they were Firefly. You can still there are people that are still attached to older versions of D&D or the whole Pathfinder 1E or 2E. And that goes right to your discussion about audience.
Yeah.
There is an audience there that will not let older systems pass into history. They keep them alive. Why? I mean, Drive Through RPG, you know, reprinted first edition material. You know, they reprinted second edition material.
There's a market there. You know, so as we're recording now, because our listeners know we record anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks in advance. We've been averaging close to 3 weeks in advance. So by the time everyone hears this, this news will not be new. But just days ago, Edge Studio, now that it's up and running, released what's this hyphen? Sam Stewart Greger? What's his? That's terrible. I
can't remember.
I read a bunch of his stuff, but you know, so the showrunner, if you will, for Edge Studio, he released an update saying that when we talked about this a little bit last week, saying that they had secured, you know, the Star Wars franchise license. Great. They were re-releasing all the big hits. Outstanding. And then this I just saw this on a thread again today, that it's getting rehashed. He said, you know, we're also going to be moving in new directions. And I assumed that meant, oh, good, new source books. But others are saying, no, they might be coming out with a new system that is somehow backwards compatible. I have no idea. I have no idea. Right. Maybe that won't happen. But I bring this up because this is what we're talking about, right? How do you do something like that in a way that is potentially successful, that hits that sweet spot of the trifecta you came up with, right? Of story, of mechanic, of audience. One answer, I suppose, is beta test the heck out of it.
Which they did, right? Pathfinder, and you could still find it. Use bookstores, beta test materials for Edge of the Empire before they released because Edge was the first release of the FFG system.
At my neighborhood half price books, there is often an Edge of the Empire beta core rule book on the shelf. Yep. And then of course D&D, right, with the Unearthed Arcana, which have been going on for how long? Right, outsourced to the world, and then that stuff slowly finds its way into books like Candlekeep Mysteries.
Yep.
Or sorry, more emphatically, Tasha's.
Tasha, yeah. I don't have Candlekeep yet, so I had to take your word for it.
I don't know how that is possible. I mean, guys, Brad will buy any.
Boy, you really are
RPG
assuming that my wife
book.
won't. Yeah, my wife will never listen.
Oh, I'm so confident in that assumption, my friend. Both of ours. But there's the fact that you don't have Candlekeep. You know, that's probably good that you don't. I'm just gonna say it, because someday when I get a chance to GM D&D, if that ever happens, the only thing I want to do is a one shot out of Candlekeep.
Well, now I got to buy the book so I can.
No, you can't.
Okay. You know that's not going to stop me.
Now it's going to happen. Right.
You know, I think that is the most compelling. And I know we got to move over to GM corner, but I cannot believe I didn't bring this one up.
Yeah.
Middle Earth.
Yep. What's that about?
Yeah. So obviously you can go back and see the history of how entwined Middle Earth is with Dungeons and Dragons and so on, but when it comes
that was related. I'm kidding.
That's a rumor.
Okay. Unconfirmed.
Yeah, I'm looking at the One Ring series.
Ring to rule them all, one ring to bind them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness find them.
Oh, I thought you were going to end it differently. And then I have Adventures in Middle Earth, which was a 5e supplement.
Yeah.
And I have the player guide and the DM guide. And they lost the license, so they won't be continuing to produce it.
Though eventually Amazon will finish producing and release their Middle Earth show, at which point there's either going to be a Lord of the Rings RPG, or I'm gonna put myself on the record for it right now. I've never actually thought about this before, but I will bet you there will be a Lord of the Rings source book for D&D.
That's what Adventures in Middle Earth are. They are not a completely separate system. They are.
I mean, officially sanctioned, like with D&D on the cover.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I have no doubt, because if although, you know what, I'm not going to say I have no doubt, because
Doubt is good.
when the movies came
Mhm.
out, you saw the One Ring in publication, and not long after that you saw the Adventures books in publication, and they just never took off. And I think
No.
it goes back to our three-pronged
Yeah.
approach.
Yes.
You know,
Mhm.
I mean, there's plenty of audience.
It's also though, okay, but I think it's a testament to what Wizards has done with D&D and what D&D has done from the beginning, that instead of people going over to the quote unquote canon of Middle Earth, that need is sowed, those oats are sowed better through D&D. And that's why, like, I mean, if you look at like Ack Inc. and Wildmount and other things, right? I'm putting my money on so whatever they call it, a Lord of the Rings source book, or maybe they'll just be adventures, but I think they'll do source book, and they're going to do it through D&D.
I think the only
know.
challenge with that is I don't know if they'd be able to do one source book to cover it. I think you much like
One
there
source book
was
to play them all, one source. Never mind.
there. I was waiting.
Yeah,
I was
they had
trying
to be done.
I was trying to.
It
set
had
you
to
up.
be done.
I was trying to set you up.
But
You know, if you think about it, there is still in many ways. I mean, you know, wizardry and sorcery was really not a factor in Middle Earth as much as it is in other area in kind of the D&D realm, depending upon how you play.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't see a lot of different, you know, archetypes and things. It's limited, and I know that they've tried to generate some.
Yeah.
Point being is there's an example of where it's been a highly popular franchise. People have wanted to play it in some form or another, otherwise they wouldn't. But it just never took off.
It just never did. And
although I did hear the One Ring is coming out with a second edition, and I want to say our friend Scott told us that.
And you have to wonder if that's an attempt to capitalize on the hype about the show. Just like before we went on air, you were talking about Dune. We didn't mention Dune. Well, as this dates this, but this episode recording, but like we said, we do this ahead of time so that we don't miss a week. And this weekend, actually tomorrow night, Dune, or maybe it's tonight, I don't know, Dune drops. And we remember, we were talking off air, we remember the original relatively failed but still interesting attempt. I mean, come on, Dune is a hard one to put into a movie, my God. And now with that, who knows? I mean, Dune, as someone who read the original series, and I mean, I've been saying to my children, to my girls, second only, and I'll preface, I'm a sci-fi guy, not a fantasy guy, second only to Lord of the Rings, Dune is the single most creative, intelligent thing I have ever read of any type. And so if this, I mean, far and away, if this, in fact, my 6-year-old.
Yes or no?
Okay.
More compelling than Asimov, or no? Yes or no?
You insult me, sir. No, in terms of, okay, I love Asimov. You know that. That's why you're asking, right? Yeah. I mean, I've read the entire, right, everything from Foundation, Empire, Robots, every short story. I mean, I can look at my shelf, and I mean, one shelf is Asimov, right? Oh, well, okay, there's also some Hitchhikers and other stuff, but I digress. So I'm not saying it's necessarily my favorite, but in terms of sheer intellect, sheer creativity, honestly, Brad, I think Frank Herbert with Dune went so far beyond the mold. I mean, have you ever read the original, the first one? I don't remember.
Long time ago.
Yeah, right. I'm half tempted on reading it again. It's sociopolitically, it's so complex and it works. It's yes, more creative even than Asimov. I might enjoy Asimov more, but oh man.
Yeah. I know that Modifius is coming out with their
and we didn't even talk about it, right?
Yeah. And just as an aside, Sci-Fi Network had come out with a Dune miniseries years ago with what's Paul's son was Leto the second, right?
Yep, Leto. Yep.
Leto.
Yep.
Leto was played by James McAvoy.
Okay.
The young James McAvoy, who was the new Professor X. If you know who that is.
Was it any good?
I thought it was better than the movie. Susan, but it was compelling enough that I've watched it twice. It's hard to find.
Okay.
It's hard to find. They don't rebroadcast it, probably for good reason.
Right.
But going back to it, point being, yes, Dune is one of those franchises, much like Middle Earth, where we haven't seen a compelling RPG yet. And it'll be interesting to see. The One Ring. What's interesting, I had to look it up quick while we were talking.
Yeah.
So the One Ring is coming out with a second edition, but it's through Kickstarter.
See, a lot of good things coming. You're sending me every week 1 or 2 Kickstarters. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff coming through Kickstarter.
Yeah, and obviously you and I couldn't afford, as much as we joke about books and stuff like that, the amount of money it would take to put our stamp on these little Kickstarters. But there's a lot of great content coming out, and we'll have to see what happens with the One Ring second edition, which was canceled in 2011. And to be honest with you, if there's a partnership between Wizards and
I mean, wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, having a Middle Earth, or in effect having a separate series of books for Middle Earth. It would be something different. It would be something different. So I don't know. I mean, we traditionally do a GM corner. I've pretty much talked about every book on my shelf related to RPGs minus.
Let's walk. I'll share an update with everybody over here in the GM corner. We just a quick update. Since we recorded last week, we have actually started to play our Star Wars game Hybrid. Yes. And it's going very slowly, but I'm enjoying it, and I do think it's got a good vibe. Like you're a little pokey, but it also means it gave me, I mean, let's just be honest, things are busy these days, during the day especially, but you're being slow to respond gave me the time to pull a bunch of visual resources I wouldn't have had otherwise, which I think really can help this. And it gave Brian enough, right? Our friend Brian, we've talked about him, we've interviewed him. He's in too, and I was just waiting I'm waiting to insert him into the story at the right time, and I have that time set out. But I mean, it listeners, it did start up. Brad is holding his guilt dice up in front of the camera. You have to roll and post, and that's how we're doing it right now. This is experimental for us. We are so I'm going to guilt him. So Brad, hopefully tonight, is going to do
I will
the
I
one
promise
roll.
I will tonight.
Good.
I will tonight.
Because then I can post the response and reveal a bunch of the stuff you want to know. And I've got, again, visuals for this stuff.
And I have an old man excuse where I was going to go down and grab my dice set, so that, because I keep a dice set upstairs, keep one upstairs and one downstairs. So
keep going, just keep going.
Okay. This is the first time we've taken a left turn on recording.
Moving on. Yeah.
But
we know
there will be so I can roll wherever I need to. Now I'm going to try to word this correctly.
One of these days, look, when we get to 100 listeners, we'll have to release
the hounds.
Yeah, more of a raw, uncensored, and it's not the language, more of a raw, uncensored bonus episode that people can go online to get at the website, so it doesn't pollute anyone's feed.
Yeah. I always joke that said if we ever got enough, we could Patreon a second channel and have the uncensored versions of our discussions. But we can have adult discussions. Jokes aside,
Yeah.
I'm going
Okay, so
to
back
have the
your-
ability
you
to
got-
roll upstairs.
You had an
or
old
downstairs.
man.
I had an old man
moment.
moment, and I was going to come downstairs and get what I needed to roll upstairs. See how I'm dancing around it.
Yeah, good call.
But then I fell asleep
I
in my
knew
chair.
it. You know what? You do that a lot, but I mean, hey, that's just where we are right now.
Well, no. Wow, we're really off topic. I have a chair where as soon as I put my feet up, it's a recliner.
Yeah.
As soon as I put my feet up, I just kind of lose my ability to stay awake. So,
it's not off topic, Brad. I mean, you think about what's the purpose for this. We are a couple of middle-aged individuals who are professionals and parents, and we've got stuff going on, and it's wonderful. And we also want to do this. And so the reality is sometimes you fall asleep in your chair.
like an 80-year-old. So again, I'm saying
it's better that you said it.
Yeah, I'm in my mid pushing upper 40s.
Pushing.
They're really. I'm 47.
Mm.
I don't consider upper 40s until 48. So
by definition, the mid of any decade is 4, 5, 6. If you really want to go there, no, you're right. If it were grades, no, I'll give you that. It's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we are still firmly ensconced in the middle of middle age.
Well, you are.
You're a few months away from.
I'm on the cusp of the upper end of the 40s, but I will.
Also known as the decade approaching 50.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I'm, and luckily for my wife, my maturity is 40 or 50 going on 20. So, and you've known me long enough to know that that's true in many ways.
No, I think it's great that you caught up.
There we go. See, this is how we usually talk, folks. The ad hominems tend to fly. But jokes aside, Jason and I love each other, and this is in a platonic way, and not that there's anything wrong with it.
I was thinking of that episode this morning while I was unloading the dishwasher. Yes.
Seinfeld. Yes. You called out the Seinfeld. Jokes aside, I will roll. I'm glad we've got a mechanism now where we can get Brian involved. Brian's a very busy guy, much busier than even we are at times. And it was very hard for him to schedule time because
I think between you and me, I think that's a lie. I think that he and Mel watch so much television that it just fills his evenings. They have seen everything.
Mel being his wife, just so we're clear. Mel is his wife.
Yes, who's really our favorite of the two. No, in fact, that's how he got his trail name, but that's not an appropriate discussion either.
I think, I know you had talked about having this episode being named Houston, We Have a Problem.
Yeah.
I think we should just name it Off the Rails.
That's fair. I think you're right. I think you're right.
I mean, we started with a good topic, but it was more of a mishmash because after this episode, we're going to get into
some heavy stuff.
Some heavy stuff that is, and I say this, and I know Justin agrees, necessary discussions that are happening now should have happened a long time ago.
Yeah, well, I think we have enough grounding in what we've wanted to cover and what we want to cover and how we've conceptualized.
I'm saying the societal issues, and again, not
societally,
to be political.
Societally, we're 2.5 to 3 centuries late.
Yeah,
but to put it specifically, then for us, everybody on Dice in Mind, because it's not new. I mean, we're finally at a point where we feel like we've covered enough ground that we can start to talk about even deeper things. We're gonna spend some time, 2, 3, 4 episodes. We'll just kind of see where it goes organically, like you would say, Brad. We're gonna talk about issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and no, it's not going to be limited to race, but race will be at the table, of course. And there's so much wonderful stuff going on in RPGs around DEI, right around just being decent people and treating everybody with dignity At the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. There's so much stuff going on with it.
Yep.
There's so much stuff going on with sci-fi and fantasy and fiction settings beyond RPGs. It's a great time to talk about this and call it out for how really cool it's becoming.
Yeah, and we're talking, we're talking about this in the context of role playing and publishing of content for role playing, and looking at, the game table that you'd see in the 70s is not the game table you see now, nor should you.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And there is a lot of material out there and a lot of discussion to be had about this topic.
Yeah.
And I think we've been into this now. We're 20 some episodes in. We're not looking to, alienate everyone, but alienate anyone. I am sober. But ultimately we can't, as a podcast with you just really in effect read I've come from a business world, our mission statement. We can't avoid these topics. We're two middle-aged white guys. We have a very limited perspective in the grand scheme of things. And we want to broaden it for ourselves in many ways. And by doing that, we want to bring that to you. And we hope that for you, it will broaden your perspectives. So we're going to bring in people. We have some really cool ideas.
We got stuff coming. Yeah, there's a lot more coming, everybody. And stay tuned. Stay tuned. It's going to get good. Look, as always, be well, stay in touch. We've probably gone a little too long today. And we will catch you on the flip side, also known as next week.